I'm sure you got at least a little bit of that cabinet meeting. What do you make of the defense from the White House right now, which is that they believe that the strikes were within bounds? Admiral Bradley made the right call, and Pete Hegseth now saying he did not see the second strike.
Yeah, Katie, none of that matters. None of it matters. And I recognize the Trump, Hegseth, Speaker Johnson, soft shoe, because we've seen it over and over again. This is really simple, Katie. If you strike a combatant who is in distress, if you deliberately target someone, even if they're a combatant, even if they were doing very, very bad things, and they are not in a position to go after you, that is a war crime. Full stop. Deliberately targeting people, regardless of who they are, who are in distress, particularly on the high seas, is a war crime. Full stop. Secondly, and this is why you're going to hear a lot of nausea out of the Pentagon today, this thing of like, oh, Pete didn't know this, and the Admiral did this, and he's a great American. In the United States military, Katie, particularly in the United States Navy, there is a centuries-long tradition that when something goes wrong on the ship, it doesn't matter if it was an able-bodied seaman or whoever it was. The captain takes responsibility. In this case, of course, the president is trying to protect the Secretary of Defense. My own opinion is, based on the briefings that I've had, that in that particular strike, the Secretary of Defense had command authority. We'll find that out. We'll get these facts. But make no mistake, it doesn't matter if it was the Admiral or the Secretary of Defense. If that happened in the military, there's a long tradition of the captain taking responsibility. Thirdly, and we don't need to spend a lot more time on this, Katie, this whole thing of trying to say that we can take military action against people who for decades we have dealt with in a law enforcement context, that they are narco-terrorists. There is no such thing as a narco-terrorist. There are very, very bad narcotics people, cartels, etc., but they're desperate to make this look like it's ISIS or al-Qaeda because that's the very thin line on which their illegal use of the United States military to take these people out resides. So, again, people shouldn't lose amidst all of the smoke and mirrors here the very simple fact that war crimes were in all likelihood committed and that the responsibility lies with the leadership.
You know, Fox News contributor, National Review legal analyst, lawyer Andrew McCarthy agrees with you on that. Says there's a lot of law written into the books about how to deal with drug traffickers, and there's a lot of law written into the books about how to deal with terrorists, and those two things are not the same. Drug traffickers are not considered terrorists under our legal system, so he disagrees with the strikes themselves, including him calling the second strike a war crime. But I want to get some insight from you because I think a lot of our viewers may not understand what happens behind the scenes at the Pentagon when a strike like this happens. Can you help us? And when you say Pete Hegseth was at the top of the command during this, what exactly does that mean? Are they in a room watching it happen? Is it like the Situation Room?
Yeah, and look, I wasn't there, and we will get those facts. But, you know, you can think of it the way that famous photograph where Barack Obama and his Secretary of State and Secretary of Defense are watching the raid on the Abbottabad compound that ultimately got Osama bin Laden. Probably, and again, I don't know because I wasn't there and because they haven't been particularly forthcoming in the answers to these questions, that is probably a little bit like what it looked like. This was the first strike. There were 11 people on it. This is a novel thing. By the way, every flag officer in that room knows that this is legally questionable. They know that Donald Trump and the Secretary of Defense fired the lawyers inside the Pentagon that might have raised an objection. So my guess is that people should think about it as those commanders, uniformed, and the Secretary of Defense, civilians watching on a series of video screens, probably, by the way, with an audio feed giving a readout on what the actual troops that are engaged are doing tactically in the moment. And they are seeing, and I can't tell you who's in the room, but they are seeing and hearing pretty much everything that is occurring. By the way, the Congress of the United States will get those audio tapes. We will get those videos, and we will remind the Pentagon that there is a centuries-long tradition of the leadership not being able to escape responsibility for the actions of the underlings. That's an essential element of our military.
Will you subpoena Admiral Bradley?
The Congress will want to talk to him. And by the way, I think the Congress will be talking to him very soon. We will also want to be talking to the Southcom commander, Admiral Halsey, who you will recall resigned or announced his resignation, I should say, in the days or weeks after this strike. My guess is that Admiral Halsey probably has some views on what he saw happen in that room that you asked about.
If Admiral Bradley was acting on his own, if he was not ordered to strike again, if Pete Hegseth did not give the kill everybody order, as he's claiming he did not, would that mean that Bradley committed a war crime and should be prosecuted?
Well, again, a lot depends on who was actually in command. Based on what I've heard, I think it might have been the Secretary of Defense, which is pretty unusual. But this was the first strike in a fairly exotic, if I may use a euphemism, military action. And so, the questions will be very specific, and it's not, I don't know whether Pete Hegseth said kill them all, but, in these sorts of operations, you either have great specificity on what the rules of engagement are, meaning, you take one shot. What happens if there are survivors? What happens if there's civilians in the area? If those rules weren't specific, again, and you don't need to hear it from me, a civilian. Ask anybody in the military. Ultimately, it is about the senior-most people. Again, in the United States Navy, when something goes on a boat, even if something goes wrong on a boat, even if the skipper doesn't know about it, the skipper does not get to escape accountability. There's a saying, you can delegate authority, but you cannot delegate responsibility. And what I'm seeing when I see that cabinet meeting is the president and the Secretary of Defense trying to delegate responsibility and accountability.
One more question on this. When other survivors, other folks have survived these strikes, we've repatriated them. I guess we've rescued them and repatriated them. If they are, as the administration alleges, narco-terrorists, if they were actually trafficking drugs, why would they not be bringing them to the United States to face legal action here? I mean, that's usually what happened to the Honduran president. We extradited him and we prosecuted him before the president pardoned him.
And then pardoned him. Yeah. So very, very good question. And there's a whole bunch of really important questions around that. Number one, why did they kill the first two guys and then they decided to rescue the second two guys, right? My guess is that there was a lot of discussion about what had just happened when they apparently deliberately killed two guys and that they changed their policy. We'll need to get those facts. But you're exactly right. Here we're being told, by the way, there is no such thing as a narco-terrorist, Katie, but we're being told that these people are just so horribly awful that they're responsible for the deaths of tens of thousands of Americans, that they create mayhem and violence and stuff. But what you learn when you consider the fact that two of them were repatriated to their own countries, we apparently, the United States of America apparently has enough evidence to kill these people, but we don't have enough evidence to try them in a court of law. People ought to sort of let that sink in and think about the implications of having enough evidence to kill somebody, but not to try them.
I want to ask you about Ukraine quickly. Steve Witkoff is going back to, or is in Moscow right now. He's going to be meeting with Vladimir Putin. He has not been to Ukraine. I'll make that note. Do you have a sense of what the motivation is for this peace deal? The Wall Street Journal just had a very big article saying make business or make money, not war, and laying out the ways in which American businessmen close to the White House could stand to benefit from the unfreezing of Russian assets, the bringing Russia back in from the cold.
Yeah, so the motives here are twofold, right? The president, as we all know, is absolutely desperate for a Nobel Peace Prize. And if he can bring, peace to Ukraine, Russia, obviously that's a feather in his cap. But second, of course, is what you just talked about. And of course, look, everyone in the world knows this. The Saudis know this. The Gulf Arab states know this. If you really want to catch the president's attention, you talk to him in the language that he used before he got into public service, when he was a wheelin' dealin' real estate guy in New York City. You lay out what the business opportunities are. And the danger about that, of course, is that you see exactly what you saw in that 28-point plan, which is not a peace deal, but a surrender deal for Ukraine, because those business plans just seem so lucrative and so wonderful for you and your buddies and everybody else. But what gets lost here is the principle that the winner there is Vladimir Putin, because he gets to do a brutal, murderous invasion and actually win something for doing that, which is, of course, what the original 28-point plan proposal would have done for Vladimir Putin.
Congressman Jim Himes, ranking member of House Intel, thank you very much, as always, for joining us.